Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Greg Burge with Collaborative Partnering Services, and it is, again, my privilege to host the Collaborative Connection Monthly for Principle Number 9, Information and Knowledge Sharing. Our monthly segments highlight the 12 collaborative principles forming the foundation of the ISO standard 44001, a framework of best practices for strategic alliances, joint ventures, channels, and collaborative relationships of all shapes and sizes. Openness between individuals and clarity of access across organizational boundaries removes potential areas of conflict. It builds trust, enhances speed of operation, facilitates appropriate behaviors, and accelerating innovative value to your customers. Now, in cultures where transparency is valued, individuals must know what information can and should be shared and what information should be protected. We will explore this principle further, and around the half hour, we will set up a virtual roundtable with breakout groups. We then reconvene to briefly share our findings. Fortunately, our guest today is Will Yafi. Will is founder and CEO of TIDWIT. Will brings more than 30 years of global entrepreneurship experience in information technology. Will began by founding Intent, an enterprise content management firm focused on the Latin American conglomerate market. The firm was acquired by an American B2B firm, which Will joined as VP for Global Markets, where he successfully launched a partner program. Upon exit, Will founded TIDWIT, whose mission is connecting ecosystems of organizations to drive enablement initiatives at scale. Since founding TIDWIT, Will has helped the likes of Microsoft, IBM, Accenture, HPE, Dell, and Accenture to interconnect on TIDWIT's cutting-edge ecosystems network platform to boost their partnerships through enablement initiatives at an impressive scale. In fact, increasing footprint by more than 10 times and providing ROI by factors in excess of 15 times while meeting ever-increasing market velocity and compliance needs. And by the way, Will and TIDWIT has an offer for us today, so I hope you stay tuned to hear more. Will, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you and the team for organizing this. It's been great to see some of the sessions, and I've learned a lot, so I hope I'll be able to help someone in the community as well on the knowledge sharing bit.
I'm sure you will. Thanks so much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please use the chat feature for your questions. I will get to as many as I can, and meanwhile, please check to assure your audio is muted and your video is off. So, Will, what led you to Latin America?
Oh, that's an interesting story. So basically, I was working for a high-tech company here in the DC area right out of college. And after a couple of years, I was some of the courses I had taken in my MBA was basically talking about the growth of the IT markets in some of these emerging markets. And I kind of started studying Latin America, and then I kind of liked what was going on. So I convinced the partners in the company where I was working to invest, with me and essentially start up this organization in Latin America. And I guess, at the time when you're starting out, your career like that, you don't really know where all the dots come together. But it was really all about the globalization of knowledge that was happening because of the spread of IT and the opportunities that came along with that. And I happened to be attracted to that specific market. But the lessons that I learned really kind of have helped me throughout my career understand the spread of knowledge globally and the powerful impacts, economic impacts that it can have. So it's been quite the experience from those humbling start.
That's great. That's great. I hope anyone out in our audience who decides to ask a question in Spanish feels free to do so. Well, how would you, just so we help shape this for our audience, how would you define this principle, information and knowledge sharing, for them?
When we kind of in the first days or in the early days of IT, there was a whole lot more focus on devices and like hardware and the things that kind of made IT happen, right? And over the years, if you kind of look at the decades that have passed since then, the weight has kind of moved from the devices and the hardware, really the content and the value of knowledge. And that's what's been happening. And so, today nobody asks about the value of a PC or a laptop or a server, etc. What they ask about is the value of data, and the value of networks that bring all this data together. And knowledge and sharing are at the heart of this value. If you're able to share knowledge, and if you're able to make sense out of massive amounts of data, then you're extracting amazing amounts of value, much more so than the founding fathers of our industry might have imagined when they were thinking about the PC and the screen and all that kind of stuff. So this sea change in value is really driving everything that we're seeing right now with the spread of this massive amount of deployments in technology in every industry, where companies are now calling themselves IT companies, even though they may be, I don't know, dealing with concrete or dealing with things that have nothing to do with IT. But that's because the sharing or the knowledge that comes, within that domain has become so important that they see themselves as an IT company. The same thing with airlines. The same thing with, hospitality and healthcare. All these industries. Now, once you start looking at this value with knowledge, then you start kind of matching it with how you drive, that knowledge. And the original kind of idea was, well, you can have it inside of this container, which is called a PC. Then you had networks. Then you had the internet. But now you're seeing organizations looking at, their enterprise space and saying, okay, we've got a lot of knowledge. But in reality, we need to share that knowledge with our partners in our ecosystem, because that's how we drive our business, forward. And so there's this element of knowledge and the value of knowledge and driving it towards more than just the enterprise. And that's really where things are headed, and where we're so excited to be involved in when it comes to spreading knowledge within business ecosystems.
That's great. I really appreciate your explaining the principle that way, and I just learned a lot about the value and importance of that principle. But I'm interested in if you would walk us through how your stakeholders and your partners respond to this approach, because it's kind of different, right?
Yeah, it's very different, because in reality, the traditional way of thinking about knowledge is you kind of kept it under the lid because it gave you a competitive advantage. And so there's this kind of protect the knowledge and close it in, and that kind of an attitude that existed. And so you have a lot of these enterprise systems that were built in the 90s and the early 2000s that are really more focused on kind of closing in and knowledge. And so that really is a cultural, it's a reflection of the cultural element of how knowledge is shared, right? And the sharing was kind of limited within those enterprise environments. Well, fast forward 20 years, and now you're seeing that organizations value, their ecosystems, meaning, you've got a General Motors that might have more than 20, 30,000 providers and other tens of thousands of dealers, and then you've got hundreds, if not millions, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of customers, and all that forms, let's say, the ecosystem of an organization like a car manufacturer. And so when they're moving forward and need to share knowledge, it's no longer enough for them to share it within their walls. They need to be able to, first of all, enable some of their providers so that the providers know what they need to deliver to them, and they need to also enable downstream their partners so that their partners are ready. And then their customers as well. So this whole flow of knowledge, right, is something that kind of culturally, first of all, needs kind of for people to click into, wait a minute, we can't really, we can't be scared of sharing knowledge when knowledge is what we need in order to drive, our mission or our business. And so slowly but surely, there's this realization towards moving in that direction. But sometimes, you've got pushback happening. But fortunately, the CXOs have realized this. They and what we are getting, for example, is when you talk to CXO level, people, they'll outright tell you that knowledge and enablement equals business equals revenue. If I can spread my knowledge that I've got in the proper way to the proper channel, then and get the enablement objectives that I need to go to market, then I'm going to get the revenue that I seek. And so there's a direct link now between knowledge and revenue, which is something that in the past didn't really exist. So that's been a wake-up call for us, but also for the industry. And I think you're going to see a lot of that happening. Now, we can talk about this after if you'd like as well. Knowledge does not mean opening up everything that you've got to everybody out there, but it's channeling it in ways that are smart and that are essentially B2B focused than just the traditional B2C, put your knowledge out there and have everybody consume it kind of, on Google. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is really channeled knowledge to goals and missions and environments that you need to enable in order to accomplish your mission. That sort of thing is happening, and that's really what's driving the growth that we see in the market today.
So, yeah, because there's been a lot culturally and to do this properly that's been built up around, doing this even before the advent of all the ecosystems and so on that we're experiencing. I mean, what do you recommend to our audience about things like privacy, intellectual property, and transparency? Because I'm sure that comes up all the time.
Definitely, and within the enterprise B2B space, there's this fallacy of a choice that was essentially being considered as, the more I share, the less control or the less secure my knowledge is. And to a certain degree, it was right because the systems themselves didn't allow it. So what you would do to solve this is you would open up gates for those who you authorize to come into your own system. So those are outside of your organization coming into your organization to access this knowledge. Well, guess what? This in and of itself is an insecure move, right? Because you're actually, kind of, it's almost akin to a Trojan horse. You're letting, somebody from outside come with their horse into your fortress, right? So it's not the most secure environment. That's one. And the other is you're assuming that the other organization wants to send the droves of its employees and has the authority and compliance and regulations to do so to your organization. And that's also a fallacy because many of these organizations are saying, no, wait a minute. If you want, to share your knowledge with my organization, then send it to where my people already are. So there's this pulling and shoving going on with knowledge sharing because the systems in and of themselves would not allow it, right? They didn't allow bringing both worlds together, which is, I'm going to share my knowledge with you, but you're going to have the ability to receive or access that knowledge from the systems where you already are. And the focus there becomes not where the knowledge resides, but in the connectivity between where the knowledge resides and where it's being consumed. That's where ecosystems kick in, because you replace a monolithic system that's kind of closed in within the walls of the organization into multiple nodes of knowledge, but enterprise, right? All of them with the ability to network together and share knowledge at scale. And here we're talking about massive scale. So I'll give you an example. And I'll name these organizations because I think it's a known fact now. Two of our largest customers are Microsoft and IBM. They literally started the modern IT industry. I mean, about 45 years ago in their partnership, and that partnership continues to the day. So about 3-4 years ago, they came to us wanting to be able to scale enablement between both organizations. And we said, okay, sure, what are the problems? We kind of got to know a little bit where these systems were not kind of being able to talk to one another, et cetera. So the solution that we submitted was based on the ecosystem platform, but here's where it became interesting. We started by asking them, how many people do you think within both organizations are going to be able to access, or kind of exchange this knowledge? And they said, probably somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 people. Well, fast forward 3 years or 4 years later, and it's close to 100,000 exchanging knowledge between both organizations in an environment that both organizations fully trust and that meet the compliance of both organizations. This massive scaling of footprint, what we call footprint, is because we basically provided environments that matched both sets of organizations, but we focused on the tissue connecting them. And that's really what knowledge sharing is all about. It's not about ripping and replacing systems. It's about connecting knowledge systems that may exist in different organizations together so that they can share them in ways that are comfortable from a security perspective, privacy perspective, compliance perspective, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow. That's interesting. And so it makes me think that, so is this how we follow, is this where we're leading to in terms of the industry's emphasis on edge computing and digital transformation? Is that where all this fits?
Well, that's a fascinating question, because in reality, I think digital transformation in many ways is hitting its, I guess it's the ceiling of the paradigm. Because if you really think about what digital transformation has been sold as being able to do, is, we're going to take your computing that's on premise and we're going to take it up to the cloud and accomplish elasticity. So it allows you, if you're in retail, Christmas season, you'll be able to expand computing capacity, et cetera, et cetera. What it also did, unfortunately, that's on the negative side at least, is take a lot of the CapEx into OpEx. And companies don't usually like that. Companies prefer to have CapEx expenditures as opposed to operational expenditures. So there is, once you start hitting that ceiling, be it in terms of budgets or in terms of utility that you're getting out of those systems, then you're starting to see, okay, how can I reduce my OpEx and put it back into CapEx? So you see the hybrid computing wave, kind of, it's as if a wave hit, a wall, and now it's kind of coming back, right? Now fast forward to ecosystems. And what ecosystems does, the digital transformation, is it increases that ceiling almost infinitely. Why? Because what you're all of a sudden saying is cloud computing no longer is going to hit that enterprise wall. Now you can actually benefit and extend beyond that to a new frontier, which is your entire ecosystem. And that's where true value lies. Why? Because think about it. If you extract 100x value, let's say, just throwing a number out there, out of your organization, but everybody around you is not digitally transformed, well, you're going to hit that wall at some point, right? I mean, nobody else is as efficient as you are. So, more efficiency on your part is not that beneficial. But if you're able to not only transform yourself, but also push all those around you to transform as well as an ecosystem, all of a sudden the value logarithmically increases, because now it's a network that's moving as a whole ecosystem in terms of efficiency. That is massive value creation right there. So you go back to knowledge and sharing, which is the topic of what we're talking about today. If you're able to share knowledge within your enterprise and do it, on the cloud and get some efficiencies, great. But if you're able to do that for your own enterprise and all the extended enterprise, what we trademarked as exterprise, that you've got, tens of thousands of partners or hundreds of partners that you might have, et cetera, and all of a sudden you're sharing knowledge in a secure way with all of those guys, and they're able to move as fast as you are, that's where you're moving now the frontier of digital transformation way beyond where the ceiling is today. So it's definitely it's headed in that direction, but there's this knowledge sharing and ecosystem opening that is going to happen for digital transformation to be pushed to its next frontier. But it's happening. That's what we're saying.
So we have a question from our audience, and it effectively is, do you fence off certain areas of knowledge for certain parts of the ecosystem?
Definitely. The beauty about ecosystems and B2B ecosystems is unlike what happened in the early 2000s, that let's say when the internet, 95 to 2000 and kind of the early years of the 2000 when it exploded, you had knowledge kind of being shared in a very kind of ad hoc and, just out there, right? Well, enterprises, that's not how it works, right? They need to share, they want to share, but they need to have rules and regulations around that kind of sharing. For example, if I am a VMware and I've got 10,000 partners, I want to share my stuff with those 10,000 partners. I don't want to share them with the partners of my competitor, right? And so those rules and regulations happen within ecosystems without, it doesn't become a binary. It doesn't become like I either share or I don't share. It becomes, no, I'm going to share, but I'm going to share it within certain rules and regulations. And that's what knowledge ecosystems and what ecosystem networks are doing. They basically provide this knowledge sharing between organizations and their ecosystems based on certain, let's say, acceptable practices and acceptable business rules, and not just open, free for all, which would be a problem for some of these organizations. And in some cases, it's illegal. Like if you go into the healthcare, you've got HIPAA, you've got stuff, you just can't share stuff out there, right? So pharmaceutical is the same thing, right? And the same thing with banking and finance. So if you go with knowledge sharing and ecosystems, all of a sudden it's a magic formula that allows these guys or gives them the freedom to share the knowledge that they need with their partners and their communities, but to do it within a way that is that meets their business objectives and their restraints and their constraints.
So on the converse of that, do you have partners saying, well, you're different, or parts of your organization are sharing differently and it comes across as uneven or fractious somehow, and they complain about it? Do you ever find that, or you find your customers saying that?
Well, there's a lot of moats. There's that culture of moating, right? What we call a culture of moating, where people are just building a moat around knowledge or information that they don't want to share. So we do see that, right? And we do see others who share and kind of don't like the fact that I'll give you a scenario. I won't name them so that nobody feels awkward about it. But a high-tech provider, large one, with partners, they want to certify them. And so the users of those partners come in and they get certified. Funny enough, that provider doesn't share the certification data with those providers, of the users of those partners. And so the basic question we ask is, so wait a minute, why wouldn't you want to share this data? Oh, it's compliance. We can't share the PII stuff with outside of our organization. But these are users of those partners of yours, and they were sent as part of your partnership. Yes, but that's not. So you find a lot of these really weird behaviors, and some of it is because of this moating, some of it is because of undue fears, and some of it is because of the technical restrictions that exist, and they just can't share the data back and forth efficiently, and they don't want to be sent. Actually, there was, in one case, we had one massive GSI that literally wanted to get this data. They finally after some arm twisting, got the provider to send, the information that they needed on the certifications of their users. Excel over email with tens of thousands of records. Now, talk about the PII nightmare of this thing, as opposed to their systems that they've been connected together. The information is flowing in a secure way, right? And they're flowing in such a way that protects both organizations, whilst at the same time enabling both of them. So that's kind of what, that's why I kind of loved the title of the series, which is Collaborative Connections, right? It really is collaborative connections. I mean, you're collaborating with your partners and you're sharing knowledge and you're sharing data and insight to enable and benefit everybody that you want to benefit. And that's where it's tricky. And I won't get into too much technicality, but that's what really ecosystem networks allow to happen in what we call point to networks, meaning you connect once to such an ecosystems network to do all of your connections, as opposed to doing it point to point and integrating one company at a time, which in and of itself is a nightmare. But we can talk about that later if you like.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's sort of the last one before we move over to the roundtable was we talked a little bit about the different levels of sharing from your organization to a partner, but how do you address a partner that kind of jumped in, seemed really happy and anxious and sharing and doing what was asked, and then eventually sort of withdraws and just stops, just doesn't share anymore? How do you deal with that?
So this is the beauty of having an ecosystems network in place, because you have a lot of these partners connected to the same network, and they're able to exchange knowledge, and it's almost like a phone switch, if you will, right? I mean, you can talk to anybody you want, but at some point or another, you say, you know what, I'm tired of the mobile phone, I'm going to turn it off. I need a break. I'm going on a holiday to the beach, right? And in a similar fashion, you could do that. Now, why did I say the ecosystems network is helpful? Because if you have a point-to-point connections, then whoever the other partner who had invested in that connection with this enterprise or organization that kind of faced this withdrawal syndrome ends up losing a lot, right? Because they invested in that connectivity. Well, right now, if they're connected to the network, then they may have lost that connection, but they can now continue, connecting to other people in a similar fashion. And kind of going back to the mobile telephone metaphor, if Greg, you decide to go to a beach vacation somewhere, you turn off your phone. Well, you know what? I can still pick up my mobile phone and connect to anybody else, from my friends and colleagues. It's in the same way. So the investment of sharing and knowledge would not have been, gone to waste from my organization, because I was connected to a network that allowed me to connect to you or your organization and many other organizations. So my other connections continue to exist. But in direct answer to your question is, it also allows organizations to kind of decide to withdraw or to change or to, they merged, or this constant ebb and flow of industry works a lot better with an ecosystem paradigm than it does with a point-to-point paradigm, which is very hard-coded. With an ecosystem kind of network paradigm, it's very flexible. Anybody can join anytime they want. In terms of enterprises, they can withdraw whenever they want. They can connect to anybody they want. And they can decide what they want to share and what they don't want to share, and which segments of the market they want to share some information with, and which other segments they want to share more information with. All of that flexibility happens with these kinds of knowledge sharing ecosystem networks that would be very hard to do in the traditional model.
Reinforces your point about the tissue too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's this tissue and the investment in the connections is worthwhile, much more so than in just. And by the way, one final point is the importance of this tissue is it maximizes the investments that you had already made as an enterprise. So it doesn't go in and rip and replace your ECM or your LMSs or your knowledge management systems or any of those. On the contrary, it actually elevates the use because it starts feeding them knowledge and information that they didn't have. And so you might have invested these millions in these tools and you can't maximize use because you don't have enough information. Or alternatively, if you decide to disconnect from this tissue or from this network, you still have those tools. You could still kind of lock yourself back in and just continue accessing whatever it is that you were accessing before. It's very flexible.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great.